Picture this. A skinny 19-year-old sits in a San Francisco coffee shop, typing frantically on his laptop. He's explaining his idea to anyone who will listen. A world computer, a blockchain that could run any program. Most people just shake their heads and walk away. It's impossible, they say. Too ambitious. It'll never work. That kid was Vitalik Buterin, and that impossible idea? It now controls over $200 billion in digital assets. His code processes more transactions than Visa. Entire governments are building their digital currencies on his framework. This is the story of how a shy Russian outsider accidentally created the world's most powerful computer. Vitalik Buterin was born in Russia in 1994. When he was 6, his family packed up everything and moved to Canada. New country, new language, new life. But fitting in, that was the hard part. While other kids played outside, Vitalik buried himself in math textbooks. He could add 3-digit numbers in his head twice as fast as his classmates. Teachers didn't know what to do with him. Neither did other kids. So he found escape in World of Warcraft. 16 hours a day, every day. His parents worried he was wasting his life staring at a screen. But for Vitalik, this digital world made more sense than the real one. Then, something changed everything. At 17, his father showed him an article about Bitcoin, digital money, peer-to-peer transactions, no banks needed. Most people thought it was a scam. Vitalik thought it was genius. He started writing for Bitcoin magazine, 5 Bitcoin per article. Back then, that was maybe $20. His father shook his head. "You're wasting time on internet money," he said. But Vitalik saw something bigger. Bitcoin wasn't just digital cash. It was proof that code could create trust, that strangers could work together without governments or corporations controlling them. He dove deeper, read every whitepaper, joined every forum, attended conferences where he was often the youngest person in the room by decades. The University of Waterloo accepted him for computer science. Full scholarship. His parents were thrilled. Finally, their son was on a normal path. 8 months later, he dropped out. Peter Thiel had just awarded him a $100,000 fellowship. The deal? Skip college. Build something that matters. Most 19-year-olds would party with that money. Vitalik bought a plane ticket and started traveling the world. He visited Bitcoin communities in Israel, talked to developers in Amsterdam, spent weeks in crypto communes in San Francisco. Everyone was building on Bitcoin, payment systems, digital wallets, new exchanges. But Vitalik kept asking the same question. Why stop at money? Bitcoin's blockchain was like a calculator. It could add and subtract, send and receive. But what if you could build a computer instead? One that could run any program, store any data, execute any contract. His friends thought he was crazy. Bitcoin already works, they said. Why complicate it? But Vitalik couldn't let go of the idea. Late at night, he'd sketch diagrams on napkins, code structures, network architectures, a blockchain that could think. His parents started worrying again. Their son had dropped out of university to chase internet money. Now he was talking about building impossible computers that existed only in his head. Maybe you should get a real job, his mother suggested. But Vitalik was already too deep. He'd seen the future. A world where code replaced contracts, where programs ran themselves, where no single company or government could control the flow of information and value. The only problem? Nobody else could see it yet. He spent months trying to convince Bitcoin developers to add his features to their system. They said no, too risky, too complex. Bitcoin was working fine as digital gold. Why turn it into something else? That's when Vitalik realized something crucial. He couldn't build his vision on someone else's foundation. He'd have to create his own. Late 2013. Vitalik was traveling through crypto communities, still pitching his ideas to anyone who'd listen. Most people politely nodded and changed the subject, but a few developers started paying attention. "What you're describing," one told him, "it's not just a new cryptocurrency. It's a new internet." Exactly, that's exactly what it was. Vitalik started writing, not code yet, a document, a manifesto. He called it a white paper, but it read more like science fiction. A world computer, smart contracts, decentralized applications. 13 pages that would change everything. He was 19 years old. No computer science degree. No startup experience. No connections in Silicon Valley. Just a Russian kid with an impossible idea and the audacity to believe it could work. His father read the white paper and sighed. "Vitalik, this is very ambitious. Maybe too ambitious." But Vitalik had already made up his mind. He was going to build it, even if nobody believed him, even if it seemed impossible. Because sometimes, the most powerful ideas start with someone crazy enough to try. 2013 was the year everything clicked for Vitalik. He was traveling through crypto communities around the world. Bitcoin meetups in Tel Aviv, developer conferences in Amsterdam, hackathons in San Francisco. Everywhere he went, he saw the same thing. Brilliant people trying to force Bitcoin to do things it wasn't designed for. They wanted to build voting systems, digital contracts, decentralized exchanges. But Bitcoin's code was like trying to write a novel with a calculator. It could do math, send transactions. That was it. One night in a cramped Tel Aviv apartment, Vitalik was debugging someone's Bitcoin script. Hours of work for something that should have taken minutes. That's when it hit him. What if blockchain wasn't just about money? What if it was about computation itself? Picture a computer that lived everywhere and nowhere. Thousands of machines around the world, all running the same programs. No single point of failure. No company that could shut it down. No government that could censor it. A world computer. The idea consumed him. He started sketching on every surface he could find. Napkins, receipts, the margins of Bitcoin white papers. His friends thought he was losing it. "Vitalik, Bitcoin already works," they'd say. "Why complicate things?" But he couldn't explain the feeling. It was like seeing the internet in 1990 and knowing it would change everything. Most people just saw nerds sending emails. Vitalik saw the future.
This part of the program is sponsored by The Tria, oasis of comfort with a touch of luxury. Visit thetria.com. Your dream home vibe is just a scroll away.
December 2013, San Francisco. Vitalik found himself in a coffee shop near the Castro district, laptop open, typing furiously. The white paper was pouring out of him. 13 pages that would reshape the digital world. He called it Ethereum. After discovering the word ether represented the hypothetical medium through which light waves propagated. Perfect. His blockchain would be the medium through which programs propagated. The concept was radical. Instead of just recording transactions, this blockchain would execute code. Smart contracts, he called them. Programs that ran exactly as written. No lawyers needed. No courts required. Pure code as law. But explaining it? That was the hard part. Imagine, he'd tell anyone who'd listen, a vending machine that exists in cyberspace. You put in digital coins, it gives you digital goods. But this machine can't be unplugged, can't be hacked, can't be shut down. It just runs forever, exactly as programmed. Most people stared blankly. A few nodded politely. Fewer still asked follow-up questions. The technical challenges seemed impossible. Bitcoin's blockchain processed 7 transactions per second. Vitalik was proposing something infinitely more complex. Every computer in the network would need to execute every program. How could that possibly scale? It's too ambitious, senior developers told him. The math doesn't work. But Vitalik had done the math. Over and over. Late nights filled with calculations scribbled across whiteboards. Gas costs. Virtual machines. State trees. Most of it existed only in his head. His parents were worried sick. Their son had dropped out of university to chase internet money. Now he was talking about building impossible computers that lived in the cloud. Maybe you should consider a backup plan, his father suggested during one of their weekly calls. Backup plan? Vitalik was already all in. He'd spent months refining the white paper. Every paragraph mattered. Every technical detail had to be perfect. This wasn't just a proposal, it was a blueprint for rewiring the internet. The breakthrough came when he started thinking about virtual machines. Bitcoin ran simple scripts. But what if you could run an entire computer inside the blockchain, complete with memory, storage, and processing power? The Ethereum Virtual Machine, the EVM, a computer that existed in pure mathematics. Programs would compile down to bytecode and execute in this virtual space. Thousands of real computers would simulate this one imaginary computer, all reaching the same conclusions. It sounded insane. It probably was insane. But the more Vitalik worked through the technical details, the more convinced he became. This could actually work, not just in theory, in practice. He started reaching out to other developers. Gavin Wood, a brilliant programmer who understood virtual machines. Joseph Lubin, an entrepreneur who saw the business potential. Anthony Diorio, who had connections in the Bitcoin community. Slowly, a team began forming around the idea. Not because they fully understood it, but because Vitalik's conviction was infectious. Here was a 19-year-old who spoke about the future like he'd already lived there. The white paper went through dozens of revisions. Technical details refined, economic models adjusted. But the core vision never wavered. A blockchain that could run any program. A world computer owned by everyone and controlled by no one. Late nights turned into early mornings. Coffee shops became second offices. Vitalik's entire world narrowed to 13 pages of text and the impossible dream they described. His friends in the Bitcoin community were split. Some called it brilliant, others called it dangerous, a few called it both. "You're trying to build the internet inside a blockchain," one developer told him. "That's either genius or completely insane." Vitalik smiled. Why can't it be both? The white paper was finally ready. 13 pages that would either change the world or prove that some ideas are too big for reality. But first, he had to convince people to fund something that didn't exist yet. Something that might be impossible to build. Something that could reshape human civilization, or fail spectacularly trying. The hardest part wasn't writing the code. It was believing that code could rewrite the rules of everything. July 2014. The Ethereum crowd sale was about to launch. Vitalik stared at his laptop screen, finger hovering over the publish button. Once he clicked it, there was no going back. He was asking strangers on the internet to send him Bitcoin. Lots of Bitcoin, in exchange for tokens that represented, what exactly? Code that didn't exist yet. A computer that lived only in his imagination? A promise that he could build the impossible. His team was nervous. Gavin Wood paced around their cramped office in Zug, Switzerland. "What if nobody buys?" he asked. "What if we raise nothing?" Vitalik had a different fear. What if they raised everything? What if people actually believed in his vision enough to bet millions on it? The pressure would be crushing. He clicked publish. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Bitcoin started flowing in faster than anyone expected. $2 million in the first day. $5 million by the end of the week. People were buying Ether tokens for an idea that existed only on paper. But not everyone was excited. The Bitcoin community was split. Some called Ethereum brilliant. Others called it a dangerous distraction from Bitcoin's mission. "You're selling vaporware," critics posted on forums.
This part of the program is sponsored by Via Nature, where nature meets innovation. Visit vianature.com. Your planet-friendly goodies are just a click away.
This is just a fancy way to separate people from their money. The attack stung. Vitalik had never asked anyone for money before. Now he was responsible for millions of dollars from thousands of people who believed in him. Strangers who trusted a 20-year-old with their savings. The technical challenges were mounting too. Building a virtual machine that could run inside a blockchain wasn't just hard. It might actually be impossible. Late nights in the Zug office became the norm. Vitalik would code for 18 hours straight, surviving on energy drinks and determination. His eyes were bloodshot. His hands shook from too much caffeine. "Maybe we promised too much," Gavin said, during one particularly brutal debugging session. But Vitalik couldn't give up. Every day, more Bitcoin arrived. More people betting on his vision. The crowd sale total kept climbing. $10 million, $15 million, $18 million, $18 million for code that didn't work yet. The weight of it was crushing. Vitalik stopped sleeping properly. Every bug felt like a betrayal of trust. Every setback felt like proof that the critics were right. His parents called constantly. "Are you eating enough? Are you sleeping? Maybe you should take a break." Break? There was no time for breaks. Thousands of people had given him their money. They expected a world computer. They expected smart contracts. They expected the future. The Ethereum virtual machine was the biggest challenge. How do you build a computer that runs the same program on thousands of different machines and always gets the same result? One tiny bug could destroy everything. Months passed. The initial launch date came and went. Then the second date. Then the third. The community was getting restless. "Where's our blockchain?" people demanded on forums. "You took our money. Where's the product?" Vitalik felt like he was drowning. Every line of code mattered. Every design decision could make or break the entire system. The pressure was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. His team was fracturing under the stress. Arguments broke out over technical details. Some developers wanted to simplify the vision. Others wanted to add more features. "We're trying to build too much too fast," one team member said during a heated meeting. But Vitalik refused to compromise. This wasn't just about building another cryptocurrency. This was about proving that code could replace institutions, that programs could enforce contracts better than courts, that mathematics could create trust better than governments. The breakthrough came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. Vitalik was alone in the office, debugging the gas calculation system. Gas was his solution to the infinite loop problem. Every operation would cost a tiny amount of ether. Run out of gas, and your program stops. Suddenly, the test cases started passing. The virtual machine was executing code correctly. Smart contracts were running exactly as programmed. It worked. The impossible computer actually worked. Vitalik called Gavin immediately. "It's working," he whispered into the phone. "The EVM is actually working." But even as the technical pieces fell into place, the pressure only intensified. Launch was approaching. Soon, the world would see whether Ethereum was revolutionary technology or an expensive mistake. $18 million, thousands of believers, one impossible promise. The code would either change everything or destroy his reputation forever. There was only one way to find out. July 30th, 2015, 3:15 p.m. UTC. After months of delays and crushing pressure, Vitalik clicked the final button. The Ethereum mainnet went live. The world's first programmable blockchain was born. Within hours, something magical started happening. Developers around the world began deploying smart contracts. Simple ones at first. Digital tokens, basic voting systems, but each one proved the same incredible point. Code was law now. Programs could enforce themselves.
This part of the program is sponsored by Pause Wars. Gear up for happy tales. Sniff out pausewars.com, where your pet's wag comes with a splash of style.
No lawyers needed, no courts required. Just mathematics and cryptography creating trust between strangers. Vitalik watched the transaction count climb and felt something he'd never experienced before. He'd actually built the impossible. But the real test came 6 months later. A group of developers launched something called the DAO, Decentralized Autonomous Organization. It was Ethereum's first killer app. Picture a venture capital fund with no managers, no board of directors, no human decision makers at all. Just code that collected money from investors and automatically funded projects based on votes. The idea was revolutionary and terrifying. Within weeks, the DAO raised $150 million, the largest crowdfunding campaign in history, all managed by smart contracts running on Ethereum. Vitalik watched in amazement as his creation enabled something he'd never imagined. But then disaster struck. June 17, 2016, 3:34 a.m. Vitalik's phone exploded with notifications. Something was wrong with the DAO. Very wrong. A hacker had found a bug in the smart contract code. Not in Ethereum itself, but in the DAO's programming. The attacker was draining millions of dollars, exploiting a flaw that let them withdraw the same money over and over again. $50 million stolen, then $60 million. The hack was still ongoing. Vitalik stared at his screen in horror. This wasn't just about money. This was about everything Ethereum represented. If smart contracts could be hacked this easily, who would trust them? The crypto community was in panic. Ethereum is broken, headlines screamed. Smart contracts can't be trusted. But Vitalik knew something the critics didn't. The hack wasn't Ethereum's fault. The blockchain was working perfectly. The DAO's code was flawed, but Ethereum had executed it exactly as written. Code is law. Even when the code is wrong, that's when the impossible choice arrived. Ethereum's code could be changed. A hard fork could reverse the hack, returning the stolen money to investors. But doing so would violate everything the blockchain stood for: immutability, censorship resistance, code as law. We can't just undo transactions because we don't like them, some developers argued. That makes us no better than traditional banks. Others disagreed. $50 million was stolen. We have the power to fix this. Don't we have a responsibility to act? The community was tearing itself apart. Vitalik found himself in the middle of the biggest philosophical crisis in blockchain history. For weeks the debate raged. Forums exploded with arguments. Conferences became battlegrounds. The future of Ethereum hung in the balance. Vitalik barely slept. Every decision felt impossible. Save the DAO investors and compromise Ethereum's principles, or let the hack stand and watch his creation's reputation crumble. Finally, he made the call. Ethereum would hard fork. The hack would be reversed. The stolen money would be returned. But not everyone agreed to follow the new chain. When the hard fork activated, something unprecedented happened. The blockchain split in two. Most users followed the new chain, now called Ethereum. But a significant minority stayed on the original chain, which became Ethereum Classic. One blockchain became two. The community was permanently divided. Critics called it proof that Ethereum was centralized. that Vitalik was a dictator who could change the rules whenever he wanted. The attacks were brutal and personal. But something else was happening too. Developers were building. Despite the controversy, despite the criticism, Ethereum kept growing. DeFi was born. Decentralized finance. Lending protocols that worked without banks. Exchanges that traded without intermediaries. Insurance that paid out automatically when conditions were met. All running on Ethereum. All powered by smart contracts. Uniswap launched, letting anyone trade tokens without a central exchange. Compound let people lend and borrow cryptocurrency without banks. MakerDAO created a stablecoin backed by collateral instead of government promises. Each application proved Vitalik's original vision. Code could replace institutions. Programs could create trust. Mathematics could govern money. Then came the NFT explosion. Non-fungible tokens. Digital art that could be owned and traded like physical paintings. Most people called it a bubble, a scam. Worthless JPEGs selling for millions. But Vitalik saw something deeper. NFTs weren't about art. They were about digital ownership itself. For the first time in history, you could truly own something that existed only in cyberspace. CryptoPunks sold for millions. Bored apes became status symbols. Digital real estate and virtual worlds traded for more than actual houses, all secured by Ethereum smart contracts. The numbers became staggering. Billions of dollars locked in DeFi protocols. Millions of NFTs created and traded. Thousands of decentralized applications running 24/7 without human intervention. Ethereum wasn't just processing transactions anymore. It was hosting entire economies, digital worlds where the rules were written in code and enforced by mathematics. But with success came new problems. The network was slow, expensive, and energy-hungry. Critics pointed out that Ethereum used more electricity than entire countries. "You built a world computer," one journalist told Vitalik, "but it's destroying the actual world." The criticism hit hard. This wasn't the future he'd envisioned. Clean, efficient, accessible to everyone. Instead, Ethereum had become a playground for the wealthy, with transaction fees so high that regular people couldn't afford to use it. Governments started paying attention too. Regulators who'd ignored cryptocurrency for years suddenly realized that Ethereum powered a parallel financial system worth hundreds of billions. Some countries embraced it, others tried to ban it. But here's the thing about decentralized systems. They're really hard to shut down. Ethereum kept running. Through regulatory threats, through technical challenges, through community splits and philosophical crises. The code had developed a life of its own. Vitalik watched his creation evolve beyond anything he'd imagined. Smart contracts governing everything from insurance claims to marriage contracts. DAOs making decisions that affected millions of people. Digital currencies challenging the dominance of the dollar. The shy Russian kid who'd started with an impossible idea had accidentally created something more powerful than most governments. Something that processed more transactions than Visa. Something that secured more value than most banks. But power comes with responsibility, and Vitalik was about to learn that being the creator of a world-changing technology meant living with consequences he'd never anticipated. The code that was supposed to free humanity might have created new forms of control instead. Success felt like a trap. By 2017, Ethereum had grown beyond anything Vitalik had imagined, but with it came something he'd never wanted: power. People hung on his every word. A single tweet could move markets. A casual comment at a conference could shift billions in investment. The crypto world treated him like a prophet, and he hated every second of it. "I never wanted to be a leader," he confided to a friend. "I just wanted to build cool technology. But the technology had made him something he'd never asked to become. The unofficial king of a digital empire worth hundreds of billions. The pressure was suffocating. Death threats arrived daily. Governments around the world wanted to regulate his creation. Some wanted to ban it entirely. Others wanted to control it. Vitalik's apartment in Singapore became a fortress. Security guards, encrypted communications. He couldn't go anywhere without looking over his shoulder. The shy kid who'd once spent 16 hours a day playing World of Warcraft now lived in a world more dangerous than any video game. The worst part? People expected him to have all the answers. Ethereum is too slow, critics complained. Fix it. Transaction fees are too high, users demanded. Lower them. The network uses too much energy, environmentalists protested. Make it green. Every problem became his problem. Every flaw became his responsibility. The decentralized dream had created the most centralized pressure point imaginable. Him. His parents worried constantly. Maybe you should step back, his mother suggested during one of their video calls. Let someone else handle the pressure. But who else could handle it? Ethereum had no CEO, no board of directors, no official leadership structure. Just Vitalik, accidentally holding together a system that millions of people depended on. The environmental criticism hit hardest. Ethereum's proof-of-work system consumed massive amounts of electricity. Mining farms full of specialized computers, all competing to process transactions. The carbon footprint was enormous. You're destroying the planet, activists accused him at conferences. How can you sleep at night? Vitalik barely slept at all anymore. The guilt was crushing. He'd created Ethereum to democratize finance, to free people from traditional institutions. Instead, he'd built something that might be accelerating climate change. That's when he made the most ambitious decision of his life. Ethereum would completely change how it worked. Proof of stake would replace proof of work. Instead of energy-hungry mining, the network would be secured by people who owned and locked up Ether tokens. The technical challenge was staggering, like rebuilding an airplane while it's flying, with billions of dollars at stake, and millions of users depending on it not to crash. This could destroy everything, his technical advisors warned. One mistake and the entire network could collapse. But Vitalik couldn't live with the alternative. Ethereum had to evolve, or it would become everything he'd fought against. Centralized, wasteful, accessible only to the wealthy. Years of development followed, the most complex software upgrade in blockchain history. Ethereum 2.0 wasn't just an improvement. It was a complete reconstruction of the system's foundation. The personal cost was devastating. Vitalik's health deteriorated from stress and overwork. Relationships crumbled under the pressure. Friends drifted away, unable to understand the weight he carried. His net worth had exploded past $1 billion, but he still lived like a student. Modest apartment, simple clothes. Most of his wealth existed only on paper, locked in Ethereum tokens he couldn't sell without crashing the market. You could retire tomorrow, a journalist pointed out during an interview. Why keep torturing yourself? Because retiring meant abandoning his creation to forces beyond his control. Corporations that wanted to commercialize it. Governments that wanted to regulate it. Investors who only cared about profits. The loneliness was the hardest part. Who could understand the burden of accidentally creating something that powerful? Who could relate to having millions of people's financial futures depending on your decisions? Dating became impossible. So what do you do for work? Potential partners would ask. How do you explain that you created a parallel financial system that processes more transactions than Visa? That your code powers everything from digital art to decentralized governments? Most people either didn't believe him or became immediately intimidated. The few who understood the significance often wanted something from him: access, influence, money. Vitalik started questioning everything. Had he made the right choices? The DAO hard fork still haunted him. Critics called him a dictator. Supporters called him a savior. Both labels felt wrong. "I just want to fade into the background," he told his development team. "Make Ethereum work without me." But the community wouldn't let him. Every major decision still flowed through him. Every controversy required his input. The decentralized system had created the most centralized bottleneck imaginable. The irony was crushing. He'd built Ethereum to eliminate single points of failure, to create systems that worked without human intervention. Instead, he'd become the ultimate single point of failure himself. Late at night, alone in his apartment, Vitalik would stare at the Ethereum network statistics. Millions of transactions processing automatically, smart contracts executing perfectly, a digital economy that never slept. His creation had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. But success had turned him into something he'd never wanted to be: the reluctant god of a digital universe that might be too powerful for any one person to control. The question that kept him awake wasn't whether Ethereum would survive. It was whether he would. September 15th, 2022, 6:42 a.m. UTC. After years of development, Ethereum finally completed the merge. Proof of work died. Proof of stake was born. Energy consumption dropped by 99.95% overnight. Vitalik watched the transition from his apartment, barely breathing. One wrong line of code could have destroyed everything. Billions in value, millions of users, an entire digital economy. But it worked, flawlessly. The network that once consumed as much electricity as Argentina now ran on less power than a small town. Critics who'd called Ethereum an environmental disaster suddenly went quiet. But something bigger was happening. Something Vitalik hadn't fully anticipated. His code wasn't just processing cryptocurrency anymore. It was becoming the backbone of the internet itself. Web 3. The decentralized web. Built entirely on Ethereum's foundation, major corporations started building on his blockchain. Nike launched digital sneakers as NFTs. Starbucks created loyalty programs using smart contracts. Even traditional banks began offering Ethereum-based services. The numbers were staggering. Ethereum now processed more transactions per day than Visa and MasterCard combined. Over $100 billion locked in DeFi protocols. Millions of smart contracts executing automatically, 24/7, without human intervention. But here's what really blew Vitalik's mind. Governments were adopting his technology. Central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, China's digital yuan, Europe's digital euro, America's proposed digital dollar, all built using frameworks inspired by Ethereum. The same governments that had tried to ban cryptocurrency were now using his code to create their own digital money. The irony was perfect and terrifying. You've accidentally built the infrastructure for global financial surveillance, a privacy advocate warned him. Every transaction trackable, every payment monitored. The criticism stung because it contained truth. Ethereum's transparency was a feature, not a bug. But transparency could become surveillance in the wrong hands. Vitalik found himself in an impossible position. His creation was succeeding beyond his wildest dreams. But success meant losing control over how it was used. Dictatorships used Ethereum to create digital currencies that tracked every citizen purchase. Corporations used it to build loyalty programs that monitored consumer behavior. Even democracies were exploring ways to use blockchain for digital identity systems. The world computer he'd envisioned as a tool for freedom was becoming a tool for control. "This isn't what I intended," Vitalik admitted during a rare interview. But maybe intention doesn't matter anymore. The code has its own life now. And it did. Ethereum had evolved beyond his influence. Thousands of developers contributed to its growth. Millions of users depended on its services. The network processed transactions worth trillions annually. His creation had become bigger than governments, more influential than corporations, more persistent than institutions. The shy Russian kid who dropped out of university to chase an impossible dream had accidentally built the most powerful computer in human history, one that couldn't be shut down, couldn't be controlled, couldn't be stopped. But power without wisdom is dangerous, and Vitalik was still learning what his code had unleashed. The future he'd built was arriving faster than anyone expected. The question wasn't whether it would change everything. The question was whether humanity was ready for what came next.